Hello, I'm Simon Headley, and welcome to Pause, Stop, Reset. Today I'm joined by Dr. Rachel Taylor. She's got a great energy, unique perspective, both professionally and personally, and is somebody that's living Pause, Stop, Reset in my view, and also helping other people do the same. So Rachel, welcome to the show.
Hi, Simon. Thank you for inviting me on.
So let's start with the basic, but I don't give you much for an introduction there because I want you to do it yourself, given what you're going through and who you are. So if people don't know you very well yet, haven't kept up with you, don't know you at all, who are you and what is Rachel focused on?
Well, I have many hats and I generally describe myself a cognitive neuroscientist. I used to be a psychologist before I got really upset with how psychology is going. And I basically work with organizations, I work with individuals to sort of bring them into awareness and also teach them how the environment actually impacts on their brain function, their nervous system function, and how to improve their performance and how they can achieve the life that they want. I'm also the founder of a new movement. I'm leading a revolution where I want everybody to realize that they are unbroken and that actually it's everything around them. The way that we live is definitely broken. And I want to lead people into realizing this.
I love it. You definitely have that revolutionary side to you. We're going to keep touching quite light today, and at the same time, we can go deep as well. And I love that. And I love that. How do you say it? There's something neuroscientist?
Cognitive neuroscientist. So, around brain function. And this is really important is that, often, particularly with health matters and, how we live, we have a reductionist point of view where everybody is reduced to parts. Well, we're not, are we? We're whole systems. And if something's not quite right with part of the system, the rest of the system's going to be out of kilter. And we need to have more of an understanding of this and educate ourselves.
And what I love is you bring like a science background to an area that's often full of people with, let's call it anecdotal possible evidence. I'm a maths guy, statistics primarily, and I love reality that's grounded in reality as opposed to my grandmother's uncle's dog said, which often is happening in the space. And that movement about people becoming unbroken is something that is such an important one and so hard to do when we're in it ourselves, right? You need that help from the outside, I think. And we'll touch on that more during the show, I'm sure. You and I had hours talking last time. We have a half-hour show, so we're nice and focused. So let's pause, stop, reset. Let's start with the basics. If you look back on your life till now, what's the biggest shifts and resets you've been through?
Well, one of the hugest resets that I went through was I actually lost more than half of my body weight. And that was a huge reset in many ways because my body actually wasn't functioning properly. So I had to have medical intervention to make it. And then within 8 months, I'd literally lost 11 stone. And that was huge, not just in terms of physical appearance, but actually it was like the emergence of who I was and sort of the emotional turmoil, because then I realized just how differently people viewed me just because I looked differently. So that was like physically the hugest transformation that I went through, but I'm continually shifting and resetting. Every day I reinvent myself. I don't want to be put into a box. I don't want to be pigeonholed. So, I don't have a signature look. I don't have signature statements. And I'm not a person who is content just with habitual sameness. I quite like to challenge my mind in different areas constantly. So, if you were to ask sort of close friends and certainly my eldest daughter who remembered the Rachel pre-metabolic surgery, they would have probably a very different take. But for me, the emergence of myself, my true self, it is sort of part of that reset. But then the confidence where I'm actually okay to sort of stand up and say, this is Rachel and I am who I am, is sort of on a daily basis. So yeah, every day is a shift and reset every day.
Wow. And I didn't, even though we spoke before, I didn't know about that weight loss. That's a huge amount of weight loss. Was that over like a year or 6 months? How long did that process take?
It was 8 months. And the ironic thing was because it was a medical issue, I actually ended up having to eat more than I did when I was at my, my largest, because my body hadn't worked properly. And, it's so complex in terms of how our bodies work. And I think that for me, it was sort of the complexity of it, how I viewed myself, how the world viewed me, and therefore how I responded to that really sort of, was the pinnacle of the hugest shift and reset for me, in that I could have a voice. I wasn't invisible. I am still impossible. That's a theme throughout my life. I've always been called impossible. But I wasn't invisible, and I didn't want to be invisible anymore, if that makes sense.
No, completely. I've had some health challenges and weight fluctuations and going through some at the moment. And it's funny how much it impacts you in ways that you'd expect and others don't. And also when you do shift it, others don't always reset them. They're listening for who you are, right? So again, if you've been quiet and haven't had that voice, haven't had that self-expression, stepping back into it. And I have a sense the world can be hearing more from you in the coming days and weeks and months ahead, which is why I'm glad we're having you on the show here. It's a really fun time, I think, with the world and the opportunities we have to go through these things. I mean, you touched on it, how you're always doing that reset. I love you said you're living this content, this ideas. I'm curious, which of the three you find hardest? Do you find it easy to pause, easy to stop, easy to reset? Which is the one that is hardest for you, and why do you think it is?
Stop is the hardest one for me, because I've always just kept on going, even when it wasn't good for me to keep on going. And I think particularly prior to what I've just discussed around sort of metabolism, there was such an impact of events throughout my childhood, throughout my teenage years and early adulthood. There was so many events where sort of the mantra of, when I went to get some help, it was always labeled under mental health conditions. The mantra of sort of mental health services is, just keep on going forward. There was a lot that was going on with me that was physical health wise, and it's possibly not the best advice to give somebody, and I think because that was conditioned into me, just keep on going, it became impossible to stop. And not just for my own endeavors, but even when people were doing things that were unkind, that were abusive, that really were bad for me, to me, even that wasn't enough for me to say stop. So stop has always been the hardest one. And I have got better at saying stop. I probably say it in a different way to stop, which possibly might not be suitable for your listeners. But I have definitely got better. Let's just say it's a harshest way of saying no. I have got better, but it is my, it is hard for me to just stop, because I've had it conditioned, just keep going, just keep swimming, and it's really difficult to actually just say, no, this is not where I want to go. This is not what I want to happen. I am not accepting this anymore in my life.
Yeah. And it's I'm not laughing, but there's a resonance and echoing of what you're saying there, because especially for entrepreneurs and startups, and I've got one in mind particularly, we actually use that phrase, keep saying, got to keep swimming, because there is that fear that if you actually stop, it'll all crumble.
Yeah.
And at the same time, sometimes there is, and there's a great book I mentioned on one of the previous shows with Jason, actually, I think it was Seth Godin's book. You do need to keep going to break through things. And sometimes actually, no, we need to do a full stop and even like medical or other business surgery and go and reset things. And it can be really hard, especially when you get that supportive environment going, just keep, it'll work out. Try again next week, try again. And some of the most destructive relationships are where the friends around you are saying, no, it's great. You'll work it out. Keep going. And actually going like stop and then start again, start a new choice is a whole thing. I really appreciate that. And again, I'm loving how open you're being with us. It's really important, I think, that we find a way to share our stories, because otherwise people don't know. They see the success story, but not how you got there, right?
Yeah. And I think if you don't believe in the stories, or, I am terrible for this, Simon, is that I often forget that I'm human. I actually think, no, I'm not human. I'm not like anybody else. And I know everybody feels like that at some point in their life. But if you don't sort of resonate with the story, or, you don't align to what we're saying, let's just take it back to biology. And evolutionary speaking, our bodies are made for just 15 hours per week of stressful work.
Really?
That's how we're made, for just 15 hours. So if you don't believe in any of our stories, just take that little nugget and just think, how much more stress and allostatic load are you placing on your body? And that's when the power of no becomes even more significant.
Wow, I'd never heard that before. I'm curious, because especially like I was a city guy, right, for 10 years, or one of my sides of my life. And it was, you were working 12 hours a day. So we were going through that level in the first hour, the first day of the worst week.
Yeah.
So I can and imagine I've definitely seen that cortisol adrenal cycle we get into, right? When you're sort of driven by stress and not actually thinking how we would in a calm environment. We've seen it last week with this petrol stuff happening in the UK. People are acting in ways and reacting because they're stressed and not having that. That's really interesting. And that research again that you've been through, that's not really that well known. I'm somewhat well read, I think, at the times. Never heard that before. So it sounds like there's a depth of understanding of the brain and the human from this sort of neuroscience background that isn't yet well known to the public. Is that true?
Well, I think, the stuff is out there, but you have to just remember, Simon, what kind of environment do we live in? We live in an environment where the economy is driven on consumerism. So the messaging out there is directed straight at our limbic system, our emotional center. And it's stuff, to sort of take away the symptoms of pain. It's stuff, if you buy this will make you temporarily happy. There's nothing, we have to sort of generate work to get the money to buy stuff. So it's not really in anybody's interest to sort of start saying, well, evolutionary speaking, we're sort of still 250,000 years behind. Our bodies and brains haven't caught up with modern living. So we're still responding like that. So, hey, let's have a 15-hour working week. Who wants that? But you will notice that the super rich, the people who've accumulated their wealth over many years, you won't find them working a 40-hour week, or if they do, it's for a very short space of time. So, you alluded to your sort of banking chapter. I think most people go into that kind of sort of heavily stressful environment, knowing they're going to do their time and then they're going to get out with the cost benefit analysis in that they will get out, well repaid for that,
If only. I think it was more for me the London hamster wheel, right? There is that sort of in the UK, go big in the big city. And then, as you say, the model is you have to have a flat and have this life to do that, to pay these bills. Yeah. And there is this like weird search. And it's funny stepping out of it now, right? I've been out for 10 years, over 10 years. And you walk around London and you see people with their heads down, miserable, not loving their job, but they're sort of stuck. And it's almost like you create a handcuff for yourself. Now, that said, there are great people in virtually every area, I think, of business and capitalism, but there is definitely a systemic aspect that can change. We're having a whole different show today, and that's, I think, a good thing. So let's take it back to our younger selves, right? Hopefully you're hearing why we have Rachel on the show today. She is a smart cookie, as my grandmother would say. What are the lessons you wish the younger Rachel had gotten, and why? If you could send it back to your sort of self at 5, 10, 15, what are lessons you wish you'd learned?
Thinking about this, and I may or may not cry because this really resonated with me. The one thing that I wish that my younger self had known is that people would value me, people would want me. One of the key messages that I got while growing up was that no one would want me. And because of that, it sort of led me into behavior where I gave all of myself to people who didn't deserve it, if that makes sense, or who people hadn't demonstrated that they could be trusted with all of me, because I didn't value myself. Because if anybody showed me the slightest bit of attention or interest, it sort of shocked me. So I better reward them greatly for just even having the slightest bit of interest in me. So the one thing, and I do this often, I do quite a lot of visualization work with my younger self, a lot, because she deserved to know that she was enough. She would deserve to know that people would want her. Not everybody would want me, but that's fine as well. We don't love everything ourselves. We don't want everybody, but just to tell that younger me that actually you have value, people will want you, and you have something to offer, I think could have, changed things exponentially for me. And I know I'm okay now, and I know I am living my life as I want to, but there was plenty in my early years when that didn't happen, when I put myself in risky situations, when I literally really devalued myself just because I thought I wasn't enough. And I think that's the most important lesson that anybody could have, that no matter where you are, what you are, who you are enough. And there will be people out there who really value who you are and what you stand for.
I get why you said nearly tears, and championing that, underlining that one. Yeah, that it's such an important lesson, and it's a hard one, especially in a world that is very seemingly material and consumer led. You know, a world that at the moment seems to champion not intellect or wisdom or experience; it champions followers and viral dancing. Nothing wrong with that, right? It's a valuable skill, but it's a different time, and I do think it's challenging, and especially if we don't come into the let's say the model bodies that are wanted in that period, which do vary. It's interesting over time. You know, hairy, not hairy, bald, not bald, glasses, not glasses, are different requirements in society at times. It can be really hard, and yeah, that thing about giving yourself, giving your energy and time to people that aren't really valuing and trusting you, so hard to have that bit to say, you know what, it's not working for me and walk away if you're not coming from that place of I'm good either way. We'll keep it PG for the call, but we talked about the FU money back in the day. Like once you have enough money to say, you know what, I'm not doing that. I don't need you to do that so I can pay my bills and eat some food this week. You have a choice.
Yeah.
It isn't you don't otherwise, but you know, some of us have been in situations where there is no money for food, for housing, and it's hard. And you do stuff that you don't want to do, and then it can be a little cycle to get yourself out of it. Really hard without outside help sometimes.
Yeah, and you know, often, you know, there's so much that goes on, you know, politically with a small p, in that we're so encouraged to divide and them and us, in group, out group. And often people who are out grouped the most and vilified the most are people who have nothing. And I was fortunate in that even though there was times when I had nothing, you know, to grasp onto, the one thing that I've always had is integrity inside. I've had resources within. So it was always going to be a matter of time before I realized, you know, that I was okay, you know, but some people need more help with that. And that's what we should do. You know, we really should start as a social responsibility, just allowing people to have value, because who knows what they could do if somebody else, you know, said to them first, you know, I believe in you. I know you can do good things. You know, we should stop vilifying people and start celebrating people.
I love it. For me, this is like the northern common sense that often is missing. But we'll keep it light for now. So if we look at books and movies, I'm a big fan of reading books and watching movies over the years, in the good times and the challenging times. What are the ones that you most have turned to and have helped, and how?
Oh, Simon, you just said let's keep it light. And I was like, I'm just laughing at myself because
Well, you can go heavy then. It's okay.
what do I do to pause, stop, and reset? You know, I read George Orwell. I read Aldous Huxley. I read Kafka because
Bit of light reading, a bit of Kafka in the morning. Okay, good.
Well, you know, one of my favorite, Metamorphosis, which is really interesting considering, you know, what we've been talking about today. You know, the big, I don't want to, you know, spoiler alert if you've not read any Kafka. You know, the main protagonist in Metamorphosis, you know, his family depended on him for everything, you know, and he was literally on that hamster wheel, just as you described before, until one morning he woke up and he changed into a beetle. And just how his family responded to that, how he responded to that, you know, and the reason why it makes me pause, stop and reset is because, you know, we're so busy making sure that everybody else's needs are met and, you know, they're all right. And what about when we need help? You know, like I say, I don't want to spoil it if anybody's never read it, you know, please go and read some Kafka. But, you know, just in that when he needed help because he could no longer feed himself, he could no longer do anything of that. What actually happened was that the family could all along look after themselves. They were selfish enough to do that. They just really wanted their needs met by somebody else to, you know, to save their own energy. And, you know, I'm not going to spoil the ending of the book, but it makes me just realize that it's really important to sort of empower yourself to look after your needs, but also, you know, that everybody else around you isn't going to die if just for 24 hours you switch off and think, no, I need to stop. I need to have that pause. I need to look after myself, you know. So didn't want to get in too deep there, but, you know, reading stuff like that, you know, on that metaphoric level, it can really resonate within. And particularly if you are a recovering people pleaser, like I am, you know, a recovering, I need to be needed. I'd even go so far to say is that I'm a recovering martyr, and I'm never going to be out of that recovery model, you know, where, you know, feeling pain is so familiar, I actively seek it out, you know, and I do that in a martyr thing. Often what's sort of described as dystopian reading can really just give you that slap across the face and just thinking, right, I don't want to be this tragic figure. I want to be a figure of strength where I'm actually modeling what a good, strong, resilient human being actually is.
What I love about these podcasts is you never know what people are going to answer and say. And I would not, if you bet me Kafka's Metamorphosis, I would not have said that ever. But I remember reading that as a kid, loved the story. But it's very much that responding to things outside yourself and these very interesting perspectives. You say sometimes seeing this dystopian views gives you a gratitude for where you are. And actually, it's not so bad. What can we do instead? And there's always been that, the ancient Greeks and their cathartic stories and tragedies. Yeah. It's a whole thing. Loving those. And any movies that spring to mind?
Oh, well, I was actually going to say, and if we really want to lighten things up, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, that for me epitomizes, there's all the spoof and all the, the comedy moments. But in the final scenes where he looks around and his family's there, everything has gone wrong, but he realizes that Christmas has been saved because all the people that he loves are all there and enjoying this moment. For me, that captures everything, that you can have these grand plans and everything's going to be smooth and everybody's going to come together and celebrate. But what really matters is not all of that, just that you're there together, sharing that moment. So yeah, I love that film. And I also love Toy Stories, even though I was really upset when Disney bought out Pixar.
We're having some fun today and I hope you're enjoying the show. And we're about halfway through these questions. So on to the next, and hopefully we can get some more depth and juice out for you. So if we look back at the event experience that most caused you to have to pause, stop, reset, and it may well be the one you talked about, what helped you go through it? Because even if it's a good reset, right, moving to a new amazing house, it can be challenging. So what helped you navigate and survive and thrive through your most challenging pause, stop, reset moments?
What helped me was my knowledge of the brain. And not many people know this, and it makes sense once you do know it, is that it takes around 8 weeks, it takes around 56 days to create a new neural pathway. And until that time, you're sort of battling with your brain because your brain just likes familiar. So even if any changes that you are making are better for you, or, your outcome is going to be more positive, the brain still doesn't like it because it just wants familiar. So if you're familiar with pain, the brain will seek it out. If you're familiar with, situations that actually keep you cocooned and don't allow you to grow, the brain will want to do that. So the one thing that helped me through it is actually realize that I'm not weak, I'm not at fault, that actually our brain is wired to keep us to the familiar because it can predict the outcome of that, because the brain does not like uncertainty. Just knowing that information and knowing that I have to give it some time, and that basically the 8 weeks will pass and then we've got this really new neural pathway and we have to just keep on behaving in a similar way until that becomes habitual behavior. That kind of comforts me, Simon. Now, I know that might seem geeky to people, but I know that loads of people sort of beat themselves up because they're unable to carry something through, or it's really difficult to keep going on a certain path. And I'm going to give you all the heads up. It's not you, it's your brain. So just every day, I just thought when I was going through difficult things, like, what can I do today to get to the end of the day doing something that's going to actually have a better outcome than what I've done before? And just realize that the brain wants familiar, and it's going to take some time for the unfamiliar to become familiar. So we must all just get a little bit comfortable with uncomfortable. So that's what helped me the most.
I love it. And I'm going to go sort of sciencey because we've got you on the show today. As you know, maybe you don't listen, but as the neural pathways get more and more established, they get myelinized. I'm just curious, there's that sort of ability to create new pathways. I'm just curious what your thought is about removing old pathways, if that's even possible in your frame of how you think about them.
Yeah. Well, up until relatively recently, the school of thought was that you get to, your brain can learn until it's like your early 30s and then it's all downhill from there. Well, that's thrown out the water now, is that we know that we can create new pathways until the day we die. The brain's really clever, is that if we're not using something, it'll prune it. That's what it's called, neural pruning. So this often happens sort of in childhood and adolescence, where if we've not used it, it'll just go, it really will just go. We have the same processes available to us right until the day we die. So we need to realize that, and that's where they say, if you don't use it, you lose it, comes from. It literally does. Now, we can have really habitual processes that might take some time, because if we've been doing something in the same way for 30 years, it's going to take some time for it to be completely eradicated. And this is why we have to be mindful that in times of stress, for me, it's tiredness, the sky is falling when I'm tired. And often I just have to take myself off to bed and have a good night's sleep. And then everything's different in the morning. Everybody knows what their sort of stress pattern can be. In times of stress and in times of that, we will revert back to what used to be familiar. So we just need to sort of be mindful about how long we did the original behavior for. And that could be forever our Achilles heel.
Really, really useful reminder there, that being patient with the process, and that we can prune some of the bad habits we may have picked up in our youth, which is always a good thing, I think, as we learn and grow. Love that. I like the idea of science. I must admit, the idea of research theory isn't always my idea of fun. So tend to avoid those papers. But there are smart people around you can talk to, like Rachel, and that's always makes life easier. Lazy Simon, cunning plan. So one of the benefits of the show, to be honest. So look, we're into a fun stage, and people listening to the show are often looking to shift, to reset. That's sort of what they're getting from the show, either consciously or unconsciously, subconsciously. What's your biggest suggestions for them? Like, what are your tips on how to best shift into more and more optimal lives?
Stop indulging and start being kind. And when I say that, is that I think kindness has been hijacked by indulgence, particularly in the past few years, is that we're sort of encouraged to reward ourselves, to cushion ourselves, to take away what feels bad. And generally that's with an indulgence. And, I had a bit of a wake-up call, I think it was January this year, when I was so fed up with life, and I think everybody was by then, that, my partner was probably in Ireland at this point, because he's been all around the world in the pandemic. Look at him, bad for us.
He's become a qualified pilot, right? I'm a little bit, right? Amazing thing. Didn't used to fly around the world. Now he flies around the world for a living.
Yeah. So and what I was doing is I put the children to bed, and then I was like, oh, I'm so tired, I'm going to get in bed. And I was indulging, because I kidded myself that it was 85% dark chocolate, so it's good for you, right? Well, not if you're eating like 100 grams a day. It's not. It's very much becoming a really bad habit, and that was in the guise, it'll make you feel better. Well, when I'm saying stop indulging and be kind, it's like looking at what you're doing and how's that going to make me feel in an hour? How's that going to make me feel in a day, a week, a month? Where am I going to be this time next year if I indulge in this behavior? Is it going to help me grow, or is it actually going to, in the long term, punish me greatly? So that's the one thing, and it's about being honest, is that if you are indulging, I'm not saying it shouldn't be a treat, but treats should be a treat, not a daily occurrence, because that's just greedy.
And some people get to have a greedy life. I know what I'm teasing a little bit. There is one of my things I'm a big believer is often we, especially for us Northerners like you and I are, there's a certain aspect, the stoic lifestyle, right? And we see people living a life of living on beaches and eating fruit and surfing every day. It's like, where's your hard work? Come on. It's but I love that bit about there's the momentary gain, and then actually how you feel a day, a week, a month later. There's a certain takeaways to love, but it was predictable. I'd eat it, love it, and the next 2 days would not feel very well. Yeah. And there was a certain aspect of going, you know what, this isn't a good thing to do. And it is an interesting one, that being mindful of it. The thing I was thinking about when you were saying that is there are some people who in the West get diagnosed as depressed or down that rabbit hole. And I'm just curious, again, with your science background, about how the brain works. Do you think there is a thing that is depression? Do you think there are people, because to be that thing you touched on of like, pausing and being mindful and saying not now, that's easy when you're having that capability. And clearly there are some people that, for whatever reason, seem to not be able to do that in the moment. I'm not going to make it light or easy. There are challenging things out there.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's, depression and depression is really complex. There's some really interesting research around actually depression is an autoimmune response. It's an inflammatory response. But I think there's also things like, circumstantial depression, which actually, there may be nothing chemically going on inside, but our circumstances make us fed up, and
Yeah.
I certainly think that we don't have the community structure that we used to have. And, we've sort of been tricked into this independent thinking, and that we can meet all of our needs by ourselves. Well, actually, human beings are the most social of species, and that's for a reason, because we're better together. Depression for me is often that disconnect, and so complex. No ability to motivate ourselves, the fatigue, the tiredness that comes with it, the devalue of self that comes with it. And I think that we need to accept that depression is a number one disease, worldwide, and that's getting worse. And it's like, because we're not living in the right way. We need people for that social aspect, but we also need people so that we function physically better. Oxytocin, one of our most amazing, it's my favorite neurotransmitter, by the way. That's a question. That's something that you don't often hear from someone.
You've got a favorite one. It says everything, really. Like, I've got a favorite one. It's like, okay, good. Serotonin, no, oxytocin. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, oxytocin is my favorite. Well, serotonin is misunderstood. I'll come on to that in a minute. But oxytocin, it's actually generating on a positive feedback loop. So we need to be around people. We need to be doing social activities to generate oxytocin. If we're not, we don't. And that's fact. Serotonin, it's mislabeled, in my opinion, as a happy hormone. It like that devalidates what it is. Serotonin basically keeps our homeostasis happy, keeps everything in balance. We need it to sleep. We need it to digest. We have more serotonin in our gut than we do in our brain. That should tell us something. If we're not eating correctly, if we're having this, I colloquially, affectionately call it bags of crap. If that's what we're eating every meal, then we're not going to have the right gut flora and fauna. We're not going to be generating enough serotonin. We are going to be feeling wrong and unhappy and unbalanced. Depression is real. The causes of it are complex. We sort of lump everything, under one sort of umbrella, don't we? Where we look at everything with a reductionist point of view. I think for people with depression, they need more connection. They need more nurture. They need more care. They need to be valued. And, I don't think a 10-minute visit to a GP can do any of that.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I sort of opened up a bit was that question we had before about this unbrokenness, this about holistic thinking. And so much of the way we as humans live isn't how we were designed to live, both, biologically as physical beings, with the societal stuff. We live in a world that's very seemingly transitory. Most parents are off doing their day jobs all the time, not spending it with the children. If you look at other cultures, that's not the case. There is a family unit that spends time doing stuff as a family. And even a couple hundred years ago, you'd have had that in the family businesses, whether it's being an apprentice, there was that sort of community feel. And that's not the case. So we do have these tribes. And I've got friends with kids now who are sort of 5-10 years old. They have their tribe, but it's a virtual one. They're playing Minecraft, they're playing other games, and they have a community, but it's not a physical. And there's something I'm again, it may just be my northern side kicking in. There's something about having a cup of tea and a hug with your gran was different than the story about it and the Zoom call. And we do what we do. It's been interesting seeing how it shifts, especially, and the reason I'm sort of bring it out a bit as well, this thing when people aren't enough, often you can get in dynamics that seem okay, and that classic trope of the tears of the clown, people that are seemingly out there connected but they're not. And we see it with celebrities, with people like, again, given what I think you and I've done work-wise in that sort of coachy therapy space, even the sort of the winners at life sometimes actually are very lonely. They haven't got people they can trust. They haven't got people they can turn to. And it can be very hollow. People that have sold their companies go suicidal. They're sort of that 20 years building it. Now, what do? They can buy more yachts and have more coffees, but
I mean, how are people building their identities? Is it all behavior and role based, or, do people actually know what they stand for anymore? Do they have values? We discussed this the other day. My eldest daughter, she's now 22. She said to me last Christmas, when I was on my soapbox about something else, very common occurrence in this household. And she said, so is your life better because of principles? And I just looked at her. That's not what principles are about. I'm willing to die by my principles. How many people actually even understand what a principle is anymore? And this is, I call it the dumbing down. And interestingly, I recorded myself a podcast podcast about the pandemic of stupid.
We shouldn't laugh, but yes.
Yeah, and you know, you alluded to it before, you know, the stressful, emotional, panic thinking of everything, you know, and a Zoom call is never going to replace that hug. But when somebody gives you a hug, it's like your whole body gives a sigh of relief. And that's a biochemical response. We're never going to get that over Zoom, Simon. We need to remember we're human beings. We have nerves in our body, CT afferent nerves. You know, there's some really interesting research that just after a week of the first lockdown, people were behaving differently because those nerves were not getting the everyday experience that they're used to, you know, the touch, the hug, the warmth. People's behavior changed as quickly as that. We need to remember we're human. We're not hybrids yet. We're not cyborgs yet. You know, we're human beings, and that's okay. It's okay to be human. I am not ashamed to say my name is Rachel and I am human, very much human.
I've been saying I'm humanese for the last decade.
I love that. Yeah.
So what do you do? Who are you? Like, I'm a me. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Look, we have to wrap up the show. We sort of try to keep it down to a half hour, gone a bit over time, but that's okay. I think for people that most want to find out more about you and what you're doing, I appreciate a lot of your world is resetting around the web. How do they get hold of you and learn more about this Unbroken movement?
Well, the website itself should be up and running relatively quickly, so people can get in touch on that, which is www.un-broken.me, or, you know, email me. I'm a great, you know, I respond. I am a real person. I am not a bot. You
say this now when 1 billion listeners listen to this show, potentially, fingers crossed. So if you want to give out your email, you're welcome to. I wouldn't advise it, but it's over to you at this point. So what's the email?
Oh, well, I'm a pragmatist, you know, and I always say to people, I want to grow holistically. So just tell 2 people. So I'm assuming that, you know, it might be 2 billion then. Who knows, Simon? But, you know, it's Dr. Rachel at drracheltaylor.co.uk. And, you know, I will endeavor to answer whoever, you know, reaches out, because I think that's really important. If I get over 1 billion, I will think of a different way to do it. But, you know, let's just assume that
do live conference calls at work.
We'll get enough. Yeah, I'll be able to do it.
We're laughing about it, but it is one of the jokes about this modern world. When you had a small village, you could talk to everybody. The human brain, over about 100 people, 150 people, most people find it hard to juggle those relationships to keep alive who they are and what's going on. And there is something about real conversations and real relationships built over time, which hopefully we're starting here today. Like, I've really enjoyed getting to know you a bit better. This remembrance about the whole systems, this remembering that there is this biological system, that there are people out there like you that understand not only it might take 8 weeks to form the pathways, that you can have these different things of pruning the system. There's definitely so much knowledge and resources if we can reach out for them and get that support. And I look forward to seeing what you're doing with the movement, with Unbroken, and how we can help with that moving forward. It's definitely one I'm supportive of. There's so many reasons we could get into. Is there anything you want to say before we wrap up today?
I just want to say a huge thank you for having me on, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. The one thing that I want people to take is that you are unbroken. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. You know, retain your autonomy. And, you know, alluding back to sort of George Orwell, even if you're in a minority of one, that's okay.
Yeah, it's that I think is the hardest thing today, is like, you can be right but not be popular, not be earning from it. And I don't mean right like judgmental, but like, just because the population says XYZ is true, it doesn't mean it is. And that's a really challenging time where there is so much going to happen over the next couple of days, weeks, months, and years ahead. But it's starting with each individual, each interaction we have. And just thank you for being human. When I spoke with you, it's very refreshing, because most people tend to have this mask up. And I think we all learn to do that. We're taught elevator pitches and presenting ourselves in the best foot. And there is an element of being intelligent about what we share to who, but also being able to be willing to sort of show who we are and be who we are. Because if we do that, then I think we can all, as you say, learn to find value and get that we are valuable as we are. If there are people you find yourself wishing you could ask these questions to, Rachel, maybe in time, you'd be one of our guest hosts for season 2 and beyond. So think about anybody that comes to mind you'd love to interview and find out what they think about these questions, because I think there's a lot of depth and value here. And for me, again, these reminders about being enough, about being patient with the process, are so vital. But with that said, we are going to have to pause, stop, reset for today. Before you head off and head out to your busy worlds, make sure you give some time to think about, maybe journal, and maybe write down on the Apple podcast shows, subscribe, give us 5 stars, and comment on what you've heard, take some action on. That's so important, I think, to go from the theoretical to the applicability, to go, you know what, I heard that and I could apply that. What can I do to pause, stop, reset today, that aspect of being mindful and not indulging will come to my head as I think about a hot chocolate or a nice sweet dessert soon, I'm sure. And with that said, I've really enjoyed the show and having you on, Rachel. Thank you for being a guest, and we'll see you next time.
You've just heard a great podcast. Want to start your own? Email jason@apodcastcompany.com.